Welcome everyone to Deeper Walk International's webinar, Facing Narcissism in Leaders and Ourselves. My name's Timothy Jensen. I'm the Executive Director here at Deeper Walk International, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this groundbreaking webinar because we have a groundbreaking work we want to introduce you today. And I want to introduce you to a friend of mine and a friend of our ministry, a real partner that we're getting to work with, Dr. Jim Wilder. And Dr. Jim Wilder has a PhD in clinical psychology, a master's in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary. He's been training leaders and counselors for 30 years now on more than 5 continents. If I got the count correct, he's up to 11 books now that he has authored, including Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, Rare Leadership, and The Solution of Choice, just to name a few. He is the founder and chief theoretician of Shepherd's House Incorporated, also known as Life Model Works. He is one of the main leaders in developing the Life Model, which is indeed a revolutionary model for experiencing Christ-like transformation. We are privileged to have you here today with us, Dr. Wilder, to discuss your new book, The Pandora Problem, Facing Narcissism in Leaders and Ourselves. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing well. I'm very excited about launching into a topic that has sort of intimidated us for a while. And I think that we're getting some ideas here of how we can actually make a difference.
Well, narcissism certainly is a hot topic and a widespread issue in our nation. Let me begin our conversation by asking you, why does this topic of narcissism scare so many people?
Well, I think that the simple answer is that most of what we've tried to do to deal with narcissism hasn't worked. So some of the leading researchers, particularly of narcissism in the church, said that we have to deal with it basically like cancer and screen out anyone who has it. And I don't know what we're supposed to do with them in the church, but it's like we're supposed to keep them from participating or being in leadership and sort of quarantine them for life. You know, counselors typically are told, you know, if you have someone come in who's a narcissist, you know, make the counseling as short as possible and get them out the door, because, you know, all we can do basically is try to keep others from having to be in contact with narcissists. So with that being the general mood here and on the internet, you know, no wonder that we don't like it. Plus, narcissists hurt people.
Yeah, and people who hurt us scare us, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, the subtitle of your book is intriguing in and of itself, Facing Narcissism in Leaders and Ourselves. Why is narcissism a problem in leadership?
Well, one study that came out of the Netherlands indicated that 90% of the pastors in the Netherlands were certifiably, using the checklist at the time, certifiably narcissistic personalities. Another study done in Canada indicated that anywhere between 30 and 70% of the pastors there were narcissistic. And we're not talking about just a little flavor of it, but fully developed narcissistic tendencies. And the estimates are that somewhere around 100,000 of pastors in the United States are narcissistic, and that everyone in the church will have a narcissistic pastor at some point during their lives. And if you ask the question of why does that matter, the problem with narcissism is that narcissists make enemies out of other people. And so instead of growing love within churches, though they might talk about it, what they actually do is create enemies, and they create problems that you can't talk about. And that's sort of the, you know, you're asking the how does my stomach know if I'm in one of these situations? the answer is, if you feel that if I say anything about this, it'll only make it worse, you are probably in the middle of dealing with the narcissism problem.
Well, when we have a problem and it's widespread and it begins to become an identifiable problem, I have found that we can have a wide range of descriptions, definitions about what it really is. Could you give us a general understanding of narcissism so that anyone who's tuning in because they've heard the term, they're trying to figure this thing out, and you seem to present a solution, which we're going to get to for sure. Maybe the real important thing is to start on common ground. So when you say narcissism, how do you generally define it and explain it?
Well, we may want to revisit that question at the end of our webinar where we've got a little bit more content. But basically what happens with the narcissist is they don't think they need to love anybody who's causing them trouble. So it's okay to punish people who are causing you trouble. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is that when you offer to correct a narcissist, it just makes the situation worse rather than better. And that's probably the core issue right there. The way we'd say it technically is a person who cannot hear correction to their identity. And it's important to realize it's an identity, that something about you is wrong, not just that you took the wrong turn on the street, although you can certainly get in trouble with some narcissists for telling them that too. But a person who cannot hear correction to their identity without provoking self-justification and sometimes hostility or attack. And the narcissists use fear and self-justification to avoid correction and to win. So narcissists are typically winners. We don't necessarily feel so good when they win, but they are out to win. And since we typically pick leaders who can help us win, the tendency across the West and in the church is to pick narcissists for leaders. There's no way that you can explain the high rates of narcissism in leadership unless people are picking them selectively. And narcissists will promise to do two things for you. One, we will win, and two, we will look good. Now, the problem with saying we will win is that in their mind, that actually means the other person will lose. You ever see anyone who won, but the cost of winning was so high, you wonder why on earth they did it? I'm perhaps thinking about our Congress, where it would really make a lot of sense sometimes to work with other people, but because of our identity or position, we're going to make sure the other party loses. That's a weird kind of winning, isn't it? Well, that's the kind that narcissists, that's their definition of winning. If you lose, I won. And so, so we've got people who are going to make us look good and are going to win. We often wonder, why is it that we're not nearly so happy when we won as we could have been? And that's because now we feel like enemies. And that's sort of the thing that narcissists create around themselves.
That's very helpful. And I'll be happy to return to that towards the end when we have some more content here. And I know I haven't got past the front cover yet and the subtitle, but it says facing narcissism in leaders and ourselves. What's that about?
Well, if we didn't have this tendency to want to look good ourselves, we wouldn't fall for it in leaders. This sounds almost like I shouldn't say it, but we often say to our leaders, make us look good for Christ's sake. And if we didn't want that, we wouldn't have narcissistic leaders, and so there must be something in us that isn't quite right. And the other side is we tend to listen to self-justifications and give them ourselves. I don't know that you've ever been in a church fight of any kind, but generally the most self-justified and the most biblically sounding self-justified party will win. And, then very often the church splits over that. So you wonder what went wrong in that, because it sounded like everybody claimed to be doing the right thing. And as long as this is our tendency internally, we are going to continue to pick narcissistic leaders. And to move just a little ahead in our discussion, narcissism is pretty much supported by its constituents. That is, if you won't play games the way the narcissist does, they can't stay in power. So the ability of a narcissistic leader to keep doing what he or she does depends on having followers that will go along with that. It's really more a problem of the people around the narcissist than the narcissist themselves. And so we really, the solution, just to give you a hint ahead of time, comes from the changing the people around the narcissism, which means we have to face it in ourselves before we're going to do much good to anybody outside.
This is one of the reasons Deeper Walk is excited to publish this book for you, and excited at what you're putting forth as a premise in the book. There's a solution. You're saying there is a solution, and you just said it, that it comes from the group around the narcissist. That is going to be, that's a really big focal point that we would like to dive into a bit more. But may I ask about the title of the book, The Pandora Problem? This title is very intriguing, and I like the way that you have taken this story in Greek mythology and helped to give a terminology to a very modern problem that we have in narcissism. And I believe that many in our audience have heard something in regard to Pandora's box, but not to assume that everyone is well versed in Greek mythology. This connection between Pandora's box and narcissism is actually impactful. Would you share with us the Greek myth of Pandora's box and why you think it's an appropriate metaphor to the topic of narcissism?
Certainly, but just to wander through the woods a little bit, narcissism itself is a name that comes from a Greek myth or story of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. And we tend to think of narcissists as people who just love themselves something fantastic because of the myth, but it's actually not a bit true. Narcissism has little to do with that. In fact, narcissists are not particularly happy about themselves. That's why they won't take criticism. But when I was thinking about the topic, which in the modern world we think of as narcissism, I thought about all the stories that are about narcissism in the Bible. It's just full of it. It's actually one of the larger topics that the Bible addresses in its stories. But because the word narcissism isn't used, I thought, well, how do we help people identify what this problem is actually about so that they can see it when they read the scriptures? And it occurred to me that the phrases we use are, you just opened a can of worms, just let the cat out of the bag, you just, made things worse by saying anything. And our big reaction is, oh, if I open this topic again, it'll just get worse around here. And here's this story about Pandora, who was a woman sent by the god Zeus to make life miserable for human beings because she was very, very curious. And Zeus knew that she would open this box. We call it a box. It was actually a vase in the myth. But she would open this, and what was hidden in there were all of the plagues and problems of humankind. And sure enough, she was wondering what was in there. She opened it up, and out flew every kind of imaginable problem and bad emotion, and things just went from bad to worse. And she slammed the lid on it, leaving hope inside. But because it was so bad the first time she opened it, she just never opened it again. And that, I think, is this experience that we all have. We're very familiar with the experience of going to a relative's house, being in our own house, going to school, being in a work situation where we can see that there's a problem and something tells us, don't say anything, because if you mention this, it is just going to make it worse, and we feel hopeless. So we open the jar, you know, all hope is lost. But actually, if we knew how to face the problem as a community, that we could handle what would happen next, we would actually look inside the topic again. And so it really, you know, we think a lot about the narcissist and what they're going to do, but the fact is we don't know what to do with the narcissism, so we keep the jar closed, the box closed. And that's why the topic just identifies that feeling in our stomach every time we are in the group around a narcissism problem. It's the Pandora problem. Don't open that one.
So in your first chapter, you're explaining this. We better not say anything. But what you're suggesting is that it's by saying something, it's by addressing and facing it, that we must actually open that box and address it if we're going to let hope come out. And there is hope in this solution.
There is, and you're both right and wrong in what you just said right there.
Okay.
Because I think what our listeners will have heard is the old solution from the 1960s that we need to communicate. And what we have here is a failure to communicate. If we open the topic and talk about it, things will get better. And everybody who's ever been around one of those is going, oh, no, that's not what's going to happen. And they're right. They're entirely right. Talking about the topic does absolutely no good. So yes, something has to be done and talked about, but it actually isn't the topic that we need to open up. The question is, why can't we handle the upset that's about to happen? Not what the topic might be, whatever we're not going to talk about. Somehow in our communities, we have to change our communities so we can handle people who feel like they suddenly became our enemies. In other words, if we can't love our enemies, we don't know what to do with them, we are going to keep the lid on that thing nice and tight. And loving our enemies is quite a bit different than the topic of whatever it is that we're not going to talk about. So that's why,
that's a great clarification.
About something, but maybe we need to talk first about why we don't love our enemies.
It's a great question. In fact, I know that you have extensively studied brain activity and the brain science as to how we're wired and what happens. And in the book, you bring out a term called enemy mode, and that's different from the relational mode that we were created, to really operate in. So, could you explain enemy mode and relational mode?
Sure. That does seem to be one of the central aspects of what we need to deal with here. When our brain goes into enemy mode, and the word is a little misleading to most American or Western listeners, because we think of ourselves as very nice people who don't really have enemies. But if we ask the question, right at this moment, does the other person feel like a resource or a problem? That's sort of the crucial question. And so suddenly your child who will not put their jacket on and the school bus is out in front does not feel like a resource. It's not like we are taking care of this together. It's like you are a problem and I have to do something about it. That's enemy mode. It's, it's not, the answer is not, we are going to work on this together. We are going to have a better outcome. We do not feel right at that moment like God's really there and on our side, like, wow, God and I really are having a good morning here today with this child and who won't put on his jacket. Because if we felt like God and I, this is just one of those wonderful opportunities God brought my way to teach my children about jackets and school buses. And we would enter into that with some enthusiasm and curiosity about what God might do this time. We wouldn't be in enemy mode. But when we feel like I have to make you do something, I am going to win, you are going to lose. Now we're enemy mode. But of course, we wouldn't think of ourselves as enemies to our children, or our children as enemies to us. The concept doesn't fit. So that's the problem with the term. Relational mode, we feel connected. We feel like we're in this together. Enemy mode, it feels like we are on opposite sides. If you win, I lose. And some people will live their entire adult lives in enemy mode. And some of those people will be pastors. Some of them will be leaders. Some of them will be, part of our family. Their whole objective is going to be to find some way to win. And that means you're probably going to lose. They might do it, with this kind of the sweet look. By the way, if you want to be successful in enemy mode, it's best not to look too much like an enemy to people. So if you can make yourself look more attractive and sweet and appealing, you're going to win better. And so clever people in enemy mode can be very, very, what would you say, attractive, persuasive. I've met some of them in the shape of salespeople who came to my door. They're very friendly on the outside, but their one intention is they're going to win and I'm going to lose in this showdown over whether I buy a magazine or not. But the friendlier they act, the more they will win. So again, not to say that all salesmen are of that sort, because they're very, like every profession. But there's a tendency for us to, when we don't see others as our people and we don't share their suffering, we tend to slide rather readily into enemy mode. And so it happens even in the family. I mean, I have to say that, my relationship with my wife provides me with the most opportunities to get in and out of enemy mode in any given day of any other relationship. And so practicing learning to love when I am in that mode is what we are almost never taught to do. So, shall I add one more thing to it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had a moment. Every now and then it's good to pause and let what you said just kind of sink in and to settle. Learning to practice love when I'm in enemy mode is something I need to learn to do. And it's something we're rarely taught to do.
Yes. So in a sense, if you want to look at what the whole book is about, is how do we learn that? So that when a narcissist goes into enemy mode, we all go, I know just how to teach them how to get out of that. This is what we do. This is what we're good at. And any community that learns to love its enemies well, and I'm talking about spontaneously loving our enemies, not something like, I really hate you, but I'm going to try to act like I'm Christian. But my first reaction is, no, I care about you. You are being an enemy right now, but that can't stop my caring or God's caring. That reaction, how do we get that? If we felt like, I know how to do this, we'd be in a completely different position right here. So, but let's talk a little bit about how enemy mode develops. Those who've been around life model teaching for any time have heard that all children, all people are born in predator mode. And predator simply means that the world exists for me to eat. Everything goes in my mouth. And if you've been around children, that's the case.
Yep.
And it's really quite cute when they're less than a year. Though you got to be careful what they grab a hold of, because they'll stuff it in their mouths, right?
Right.
But once they start to crawl, it gets less cute. And what is meant to happen is that eventually we learn, instead of being in enemy mode, that, in predator mode, that we actually learn to be protectors. And this enemy mode is the basis, it's the ground on which the predator mode and develops into enemy mode later in life. In other words, enemy mode is how I go about being a predator in my relationships, as opposed to being loving and caring and protective in my relationships. So when we think about narcissists, they often think, well, these are people who do not share the pain of others, but the incorrect assumption is that they don't know how you feel. Narcissists actually have a very, very good idea how you feel. They just don't care. They don't share it. And that's the difference between relational mode and enemy mode. In enemy mode, I see your pain and I plan to use it against you. In relational mode, you're my people and I see your pain, I plan to share it. And so I want to protect the two of us as much as possible. So does that make sense as an explanation there?
Yes, and I imagine that I'm doing what several in our audience are doing as well. I'm making notes and writing some of this profound truth down. And while it's contained in the book, I know I retain 40% more of what I write down. And so it is impacting me even as we are going through this. And in fact, I'd like to ask those that are here with us today participating, if you would take a moment and do what I call a popcorn moment. What we'd like to do is solidify as well what's popping for you. What's that thought? What's that idea? What is the concept that you've already picked up on today you don't want to lose? You want to take away with you. If you would go to not the Q&A, but the chat window, if you'd go there and pop that in, and we would love for you to take a moment to solidify what's already come toward you here. And it also shares what's popping with us and with Dr. Wilder, and it'll solidify that others are catching some of this with you. And so we're tracking along here. A little later, we may have some opportunity for some Q&A, and we'll use the Q&A section here where that button is to take some questions. But later, if that time permits, I want to go ahead and give you this forewarning. We would like to get you to ask questions about the general topic, the understanding of what we're covering, not a specific personal endeavor. And so while we know that there are many who are struggling with dealing with a narcissist or even some of these narcissistic tendencies themselves, we want to keep this on the higher plane related specifically to our topic today, and we're not going to have time to drill down really deep into personal application situations. So so many are pulling in information right now and sharing what is popping for them, and I am so grateful for your participation in this. And Dr. Wilder, you were mentioning how enemy mode develops and brings things out with a narcissist. And can I ask, what does it do to us? You know, how does it affect us when we go into that enemy mode, but we're not as much narcissistic? Or are you saying we have tendencies to be narcissistic as well in that? What does enemy mode do to us?
Well, the clear thing about enemy mode is that we feel alone and it's up to us to win. And we are looking for who's going to back our side. And, you know, what are the winning moves? We lose any interest really in sharing the pain of others. Now, I need to repeat that again because people will hear what I didn't say, and that is getting others to share my pain. Typically, when we have a problem, our approach to it is, I have to tell you what my pain is, and if you'll share my pain, then everything will be fine. That actually doesn't work in this situation at all. The question is, when we are going to be getting out of enemy mode, can we share the pain of the person who's basically our enemy? Will I share their experience? Will I tune into what's going on with them? Am I curious about them? All of that gets taken away. Not in that we may not see. For instance, like, let's go back to our child. He may be crying about putting his jacket on and going to the bus. We clearly see that he's crying. We clearly see all the rest of that. But right at the moment, we don't care that he's crying. In fact, some parents in the past would have said, well, let me give you something to cry about, which would actually be, I will win by increasing your pain, which I have no intention of sharing at the moment. That it's that impasse right there that starts up in our mind. And once we're in that mode, it's really, really hard to connect in a loving way with anybody. Now, why should we care? Except that it seems like that's what our master said we were supposed to do, is love others who are our enemies, right at the moment that they're swearing at us and using us and taking advantage of us and doing all those other things. The response coming out of us should somehow be loving, not returning curses for curses or that sort of thing. And so that's where the question is of, does the church, do our families create Christian character, becomes the hot point.
So you've mentioned that the solution comes from my people. My people. Would you explain that a bit more?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just take the Bible example. One of the clearest person who switched back and forth between seeing others as my people and not, and that's King Saul. At one moment, David is his son-in-law and a hero, and another moment he's his enemy. At one moment, he's willing to pin his own son Jonathan against the wall and insult him. He just goes back and forth in and out of enemy mode. And when he's in enemy mode, he's quite dangerous. And when he's in relational mode, he seems to be quite agreeable, but no one after a while wants to trust him at all. But in terms of a child, learning who are my people, first of all, you might say, now don't hit your sister, don't be mean to her. You're saying, that's your people now. You have to share what your sister is feeling. Don't be rude to your mother. Don't answer her that way. She's your people. You have to care about her even if you're upset with her right now. Oh, Grandpa's coming from New York. He's very loud. And he will sound like he's an enemy, but actually that's just New Yorkers talking like New Yorkers do. And so he's really our people. So we want to respond to that in a certain way. When I was small, my parents read me books about lions, so I knew they were dangerous and all they were predators. They took me to visit my grandmother, who had a yellow cat, and I had no idea what size lions were. So I chased the cat out of the room and came back in and said, Jimmy chased away lion. It actually wasn't the predator, you see. It was her chihuahua. Her chihuahua bit me every time I came to the house. I still have a predator kind of feeling about chihuahuas. But nonetheless, by the time you're 18 months old, that's when your nervous system is being trained. How do we distinguish who are our people and how do we control this? And later on, even when we learn to control our feelings, when we feel like others are enemies or are prey, you see, that's predator mode. That's when we learn to control even our sexual impulses. It begins as early as 18 months. And people who stay in predator mode actually begin to build their sexuality under predator behavior as opposed to under a relational behavior. And so now they will track what will make other people lose in a sexual encounter and call that a win. So these are the ways that we begin to learn. But the way we learn to stay on the relational side is by sharing the pain of the people around us. So if something hurts them, we're going to keep them company while it hurts them, and stay connected with them in some very important way. These are the ones that become then in our mind my people. The people whose feelings I share, those are my people. And when you get to be 12 years of age to 13, something like that, your brain goes through an apoptotic period and kills off some of the systems that are in place. And now the survival of your people becomes more important than your own. Up until age 12, 13, your own survival is most important. But now your people are more important than you are. And so my deepest values from age, let's say 13 on, began to be defined by who my mind sees as my people. And so if you're angry at me, and I've learned that when you're angry, I use that to create better relationships, your anger will not make you an enemy. It'll just make, I got one of my people who's angry, now let's see how we make a better relationship out of this. But if I haven't learned that skill, then when you get angry, you become my enemy, and now you're going to lose, and I'm going to win if I can find a way to do it. So this, it's that who my people are like that is actually what's necessary to change the predator behavior, the enemy mode behavior in a narcissist. If we don't know how to intervene as a people, we actually have no effect. And what we typically do in the West is when we have a big problem, we take it privately. We send someone to a counselor. We go one-on-one. And that's exactly what won't work in the case of narcissism. In narcissism, we have to have our people correcting someone going, you know what? Our people don't justify themselves. Our people take a good shame message. Our people really share the sufferings of others. Our people don't see others as enemies. We actually learn to become more loving the more enemy-like the other person is. So let's teach you how to do that.
Again, very helpful and instructive. And you made a comment there about a good shame message. A good shame message?
Mm-hmm.
Help us understand that.
Yeah, well, we might also call it a healthy shame message, is to compare it with a toxic shame message. A toxic shame message is something that says, here's what's bad about what you did or who you are. And it gives us no solution, just leaves us in shame, makes us feel lousy. A healthy shame message actually reminds us when we're not being our best self by kind of bringing us back to the option. So if I was to say to you, don't be mean to your sister. No, you're a bad boy. That's a toxic shame message if I leave it there. If I say, as a group identity, you know, we're not mean to our sisters. We listen to them and we're kind to them even when they are making us mad. Now that's a healthy shame message because it is included, here's what we don't do and here's how we do it. And now you've got a learning experience. A shame message like that will still make you feel ashamed, like, yeah, I was doing it wrong, but it brings out the option of doing it the right way, along with the encouragement to do so right there in the moment. There's almost every important character change requires healthy shame messages. And if you were to look at scripture, you'll see that they're full of healthy shame messages from God saying, you know, my people don't do this, my people do this. And as we learn to particularly say, you know, we do not try to beat our enemies. We love them. We care about them. We share. That will put us in the point of practicing every time we get into enemy mode. Yeah. But we need a people around us that'll remind us, because when we're in enemy mode, that is not scooting through our brains. I can guarantee you that's one thing your brain is not thinking about. You need a people around you go like, oh my goodness, you've fallen into enemy mode again. Good thing you have us here, because we're going to get you out of enemy mode and teach you how our people are right now.
Well, I want to apologize for not having the chat window active when I ask everyone to share the popcorn testimony, but I have that active, and several of you have noticed that and come back in. I wanted to tell everyone else who would like to participate in that to please do so. Some of the things that are coming through, wow moments, light bulbs coming on. Someone has mentioned, I now have language to put to what I've been feeling, or this mode that I have found myself in. This terminology is starting to really help some of these folks. And so you can share, you can put that in there. I'd also like to share with everyone that what we're talking about today is all found inside this new book by Dr. Wilder, this new book called The Pandora Problem. And it is available at deeperwalkinternational.org. You can find it there in our resources section. It's highlighted. The Pandora Problem is now open. You can see here on the cover, she is holding that box. And the question is, are we willing to open that box and face the issue? And one of the things that I enjoy about your approach here, Dr. Wilder, is that we're not alone in this. You're suggesting that the solution rests in a group, and that group has to be able to come together and work this out. So would you also then share for us what's involved in this solution? You know, I'm sharing some of the overwhelm that a few of the viewers here are sharing, that you mean in enemy mode, I have to love the person that I've cared about and I've tried to get in touch and care about them, but now they don't care about me. And this is a tall order. This is a big thing to do. And so what are some of the things that must be included in the solution?
Well, you know, just to follow up on that introductory point, when Marcus Warner and I did this Rare Leadership book, the #1 question that we came back with from people around the world was, well, what if we have a narcissist in our group? How do we do that? And the narcissist isn't always behind the pulpit. It's often someplace else in the community. It often has some money or control. And so the idea is really quite overwhelming to people. Like, we love this idea of being leaders that help other people to develop their identity, but what if we drop into this particular one? So it's really quite overwhelming to think about. And in fact, it was a little overwhelming to me thinking about how do I, in 1 hour's kind of overview, tell you everything that and to the degree that it'll make sense, right? So we could explore one element so it made some sense, or we could explore all the necessary ingredients and then no one would understand really what I meant by any of them. But here's what a solution has to include. And that's why the book is a bit long, like, what is it, about 300 pages, something like that, because it takes some time to go through one of these. The solution has to include a strong group identity. In other words, we have to have a sense of who my people are. I was just talking to the 64 Christian universities of Asia. And in Asia, they have a much better sense of who their people are. They, you know, can do these are the songs of my people, the games of my people. You know, we know who my people are in some sense. In the West, we have a very weak idea of who my people are. So for most people, when I say, how's your group identity? They kind of look like, who do you mean? Like, in my mind, I can't even identify who my people are. So the question then, you know, to sort of answer that part of it is, suppose that you would say you're a Christian. And I think a number of our listeners will. Well, who are the people who actually help you develop Christ-like character, who you would turn to when you're losing it and say, oh, help me, you know, or they would actually come to you and say, well, I'm going to help you because you obviously have forgotten how to be a Christian right now. who are those people in your life? You have to have a strong enough group identity that will engage you when you have forgotten how to be Christian. Or, again, it could be any other group, but because Christianity is the one group in the world that is involved, it actually said that our group identity should always love our enemies spontaneously. That's who we are. That's the next ingredient. We need a group identity that loves our enemies spontaneously. So when we respond with anything other than love to our enemies, our group goes, whoa, you've forgotten who you are just because they're being enemies right now, and engage with us right there. That would by itself eliminate the options of being narcissistic and treating someone like an enemy. But in order to do that, our group, a third thing, so first thing, strong group identity. Second, a group identity that loves enemies spontaneously. Doesn't mean we're good at it, just means we're learning it together. Third, we have to have hesed loyalty, attachment. It's this love that sticks us together, and it has to stick us together around weakness, so that when we see someone else with a weakness, we go to help them as opposed to trying to win. And you can see again, if we're helping people who are weak, it's really hard to be narcissistic, because that, our people wouldn't attack someone just because they'd shown a weakness. We would actually help them. And we have to, number 4, reject self-justifications, which is what people do when they want to attack somebody. They give you a good reason for it. And that is probably the most mysterious of all to Western Christians. We actually think that generally as Westerners, the best justification should always win. And so our culture always tells us to look for a good explanation, a good justification. That should be the winning move. But actually, self-justifications, if we look at it in Scripture, are always wrong. So why should wrong answers win? But again, that would be another whole webinar right on that one. So the alternative then is to learn to share the suffering of others and to use healthy shame message, sharing the suffering of others, 5. Number 6, using healthy shame messages to build stronger relationships, not to get our way, but to improve our relationships. All of those need to be grown and built. So just knowing the ideas will do you little good, other than you'll say, oh yeah, those seem to be missing. So we actually need some very good exercises to do this. And there are some exercises in the book. They're sort of advanced exercises, but I understand there's a study guide by Barbara Moon in the pipeline that is going to give groups a chance to learn these things together, to understand the concepts, and to practice this well enough that we can actually start to do it and get better at it. Because if we don't learn to do these things, knowing that we should doesn't really help us in the moment of trouble. So I believe Deeper Walk will be announcing Barbara's study guide coming up here, I hope soon.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, but that's going to be very, very helpful. And then Ed Corey has some materials that start at the church end. And let's suppose we're not ready to dive directly into the whole subject of we got a narcissist here on the line. What shall we do? But how do I create a church that's sort of narcissist proof? Not a good breeding ground for them. And starting with the study on grace and moving on deeper is a great way to start with that. And Ed Corey is really working from the other end. It's sort of like we've taken the two opposite ends to this, Timothy. I taken the end of, well, we've got a narcissist, what do we do? And Ed has taken the end of, well, we don't want to grow anyway, how do we start? And so you may want to decide which of those approaches is best for you, but a combination is what I recommend. But you'll have to do exercises together. You'll have to create a different kind of church environment in which a really high priority is given to the life of grace and the loving of enemies.
Well, I'm all for having you come back and do multiple webinars. And so anything that you're suggesting, I'm taking notes on. And I'm extremely excited to see the responses that are coming through on the chats and on the Q&A. And I would like to field a couple of Q&A questions right now. One person has asked, how do I recognize when I'm in enemy mode? And another one related to that said, how do I learn to get out of enemy mode and into relational mode?
All right. Very good questions. And probably the simplest test for enemy mode is, am I really still curious and interested in what's going on in the other person or not? Do I feel alone, like I have to just get results now? That's enemy mode. In relational mode, we always feel like we have relational options. God is here with me. I'm with people that care about me. I'm going to be the caring person here for others. We're connected with someone who feels like my people. Like, yeah, they're important to me. When I'm just like, you know, enemy mode is still tracking other people, but as though they were a threat. They're not going to help me. So when I find myself tracking what's going on with others, but in order to protect myself or to win somehow, I'm deep in enemy mode. Now the question is, how do I get out of it? And actually, if your brain knew how to get out of it, you would. That's why we've never gotten any really results up until now in narcissism, because if you knew how to handle this problem, your brain would do it. The point is, I'm stuck. So the only way out of it is to find people who will help you when you're in enemy mode. And then you have to have enough of a discussion to go like, you know what? I have just dropped into enemy mode and I'm going to need some help getting out of this. If we want to help ourselves a little bit, we have to go back and say, who are my people? So if I'm stuck in enemy mode and I can at least identify my people, I can go to them and say, you know, here's what's going on. So part of the exercises that we have is, you know, getting together with a group of people, learning together to identify enemy mode, excuse me, and learning to ask each other for help and offer help even when someone isn't asking for it. If you can't do that together, you won't get out of enemy mode when it hits you. So it takes a considerable number of weeks of practice to develop this. And so again, most people are going like, well, I've got no group identity that's strong enough to do that. So now you need some exercises on how to create a stronger group identity. Because these 6 things have to kind of work together or you don't pull out of it. So, but we've got some excellent materials for you to read that'll help you understand that better.
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. And there's about 3 or 4 questions that have come in that, that all kind of connect. And so let me see if I can just surmise and then ask you this. The question is, do narcissists interpret healthy shame messages as unhealthy ones?
Always.
Always. Okay. And so the anticipation is they're going to respond in a way that doesn't say, I'll accept that as a healthy shame message. And
absolutely.
So with that expectation, then what response should the group expect, and then what should their response be if a narcissistic person is not receiving a healthy shame message? They're like, is this working? Is this, you know, I think that's what they're kind of getting at, is that if they're not responding the way we think that they would respond if they were really receiving this, how is this making an impact, and how are we then to respond if there's not a receptivity to the healthy shame message?
Well, one comforting thing is we've devoted an entire chapter to that particular topic. But the simple thing is, If you're not listening to it, we're gonna still practice it and do it around you, because we're kind of people who do. And so your environment that will process and talk about how we're going to get better at shame messages and learn how to take them. We're talking about that as the group around the person. What a narcissist will do is watch somebody else get a shame message. And if you watch other people giving and receiving them, your brain will actually learn what you had no intention of learning if they did it to you. So having it go on in your environment is sort of like having everyone around you suddenly start speaking French. And at first it doesn't make any sense, but pretty soon you start recognizing phrases and words, and you learn it because it's in the environment around you. So it's an indirect means, very effective. And the only alternative for the narcissist is to say, you're not my people and I'm leaving. And some do. That's the across scripture. There's some that refuse to let others be their people. They got to go. They went out from you because they were not one of you, is how scripture puts it. And for those, no human solution exists. But we're actually trying to change the environment so that narcissism can't grow, can't take over leadership in ourselves or others, as opposed to making you an offer that you can't refuse, that all narcissists will lose. That can't be done. But there is real hope for the communities and for most narcissists who begin to grow this together.
In your book, The Pandora Problem, Facing Narcissism in Leaders in Ourselves, you make the statement that church culture must change. In order for this problem to find its resolution, the culture in the church needs to change. And I am excited that you have provided a solution to a very prevalent and real problem. Dr. Wilder, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for writing this book. And I do believe that as it is understood and practiced, we're going to find many more people experiencing transformation into the image of Christ, and the church becoming more powerful in its witness. And at the very heart of the second greatest commandment is to love our neighbors as ourselves, and here this idea that we must love our enemies and understanding enemy mode. So many good things that you have brought forward here. And this is why we're not just facing it in leaders, we're facing it in ourselves. We can be the solution in this community. I want to encourage everyone to pre-order. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say that I'm with you on that, Timothy. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Deeper Walk is that as a group and a publisher, you do not just think about what it is that will sell. You actually have a high value in providing for the church the next important step. And this is a long tradition with Deeper Walk, that if it's something that we really need, whether people are, ready for it or not, you want to offer that to them. And I think this has been a joint effort in that to take some unexpectedly good news to the church. So thank you and Deeper Walk for taking that step.
You're very welcome. And we appreciate your gratitude in that area as well. You can get the Pandora Problem pre-ordered today at deeperwalkinternational.org. I have also placed the direct link into the chat window if anyone wants to just go there right now. The last question that we'll answer today is, can we watch this webinar again? And the answer is yes. The full description of everything is in the book, but you're welcome to access this again if you've registered the day after the broadcast. For those live today, that'll be tomorrow. You'll get a link from Zoom, our webinar platform provider, and with a link to access the recording. And you can do that as often as you would like. There's no limitation or time frame on that. And you're welcome to share it with family, with friends, with the people in your group, those that you say, hey, my people, we need to look at this together. We need to think about this. And We need to practice this, and there's exercises in there. There's also the study guide with Barbara Moon that's coming out, and we'll announce that as soon as we're ready to launch some pre-sale. These things will go together. This could indeed revolutionize the church and help more people experience a deeper walk with God. Ultimately, that's what we're all about. So thanks for tuning in and for being with us. Thanks for sharing this. And thank you again, Dr. Jim Wilder, for your insights, for your life's dedication to helping others truly walk more closely with God and become more like Christ. It's a pleasure to have you as our partner. Thanks again, everybody. God bless and have a great day.